A desperate cry echoed across the dusty prairie as Victoria Kincaid collapsed into the shallow ditch beside the lonely dirt road, her water breaking at the worst possible moment. The summer of 1875 had been unforgiving in the Texas heat, and now, miles from Sweetwater with no one in sight, she faced her greatest fear: giving birth alone, unwed, and abandoned. Victoria's chestnut hair clung to her sweat-drenched face as another contraction seized her body. At 22, she had never imagined this would be her fate. 6 months ago, she'd been a school teacher in Philadelphia with dreams and prospects, until Thomas Blackwell's empty promises led her west with a child in her belly, and a ring he never gave her. 2 weeks ago, he disappeared with what little money she had left. "Please," she whispered to the vast, empty sky, "someone help me." The words were swallowed by the howling wind that swept across the barren landscape. The pain intensified as Victoria tried to make herself comfortable in the shallow depression beside the road. She had been walking toward Sweetwater when her labor started, hoping to find work and a new beginning. Now she feared she would never see the town at all. Miles away, Dustin Irwin guided his horse along the same lonely road. At 28, he had spent the last decade moving from ranch to ranch, working cattle and avoiding the kind of attachments that had once broken his heart. His weather-beaten Stetson shielded his eyes from the relentless sun as he surveyed the horizon, noticing a strange shape in a ditch up ahead. As he drew closer, Dustin heard the unmistakable sound of a woman in pain. He spurred his horse forward, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Madam." "You all right down there?" he called, dismounting in a swift, practiced motion. When he saw her condition, his breath caught in his throat. "Sweet Jesus!" Victoria's tear-streaked face turned toward him, relief and fear battling in her amber eyes. "The baby," she gasped through gritted teeth. "It's coming now." Dustin removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled at the nape of his neck. "I'm Dustin Irwin. I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." "Victoria Kincaid," she managed between labored breaths. "I was heading to Sweetwater when—" Her words dissolved into a cry as another contraction seized her. Dustin knelt beside her, his blue eyes assessing the situation with surprising calm. "Sweetwater's still a good 15 miles from here, Miss Kincaid. We won't make it before your little one arrives." Victoria's eyes widened with panic. "I can't have my baby here in the dirt." "You ain't got much choice from what I can see," Dustin said gently, "but I've helped birth plenty of calves and even a foal or two. Once I even helped the ranch cook's wife deliver twins during a blizzard." Victoria looked skeptical despite her pain. "Calves aren't babies, Mr. Irwin." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Principles are the same, madam, and right now I'm all you've got." Another contraction hit, stronger than the last, and Victoria reached out blindly, grabbing Dustin's calloused hand with surprising strength. "All right then," she gasped. "What do we do?" Dustin worked quickly, removing his jacket and spreading it beneath Victoria to give her some comfort from the hard ground. He retrieved a canteen from his saddlebag and offered her water, which she drank gratefully. "Where's your husband, madam?" Dustin asked as he prepared for the delivery, trying to make conversation to distract her from the pain. Victoria turned her face away, shame coloring her cheeks. "There isn't one," she whispered. "He left when he found out." Dustin's expression hardened momentarily before softening again. "His loss," he said simply, with such genuine kindness that Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes for a different reason altogether. For the next hour, Dustin stayed by Victoria's side, coaching her through each contraction, wiping her brow with his bandana dampened from his canteen, and speaking words of encouragement when she felt she couldn't continue. "I can see the head," he announced finally, his voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstance. "Next contraction, push as hard as you can." Victoria screamed as she pushed, her fingers digging into the earth beneath her. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as new life prepared to enter the world. "One more," Dustin urged, his hands ready. "You're doing fine, Miss Kincaid. Just one more." With a final, agonizing effort, Victoria pushed, and moments later, a baby's cry pierced the prairie stillness. Dustin caught the infant in his large hands, a look of wonder spreading across his weathered face. "It's a boy," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "A healthy baby boy." Using his knife, Dustin cut the cord as Victoria had instructed between labored breaths. He wrapped the squalling infant in his clean shirt and placed him in his mother's trembling arms. Victoria gazed down at her son, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered, the name she'd chosen months ago finally belonging to the tiny red face staring up at her. Dustin watched the pair, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. In all his years of wandering, he'd never witnessed anything as miraculous as this moment. "We need to get you both to town," he said after giving them a few moments together. "You need a doctor and proper rest." Victoria nodded weakly, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Irwin." "Dustin," he corrected with a gentle smile. "And you already have." With careful movements, Dustin helped Victoria to her feet. She swayed dangerously and he caught her against his chest, her son cradled between them. "Can you ride?" he asked, concerned by her pallor. Victoria nodded determinedly. "I have to." Dustin helped her onto his horse, then handed her the baby before mounting behind her. With one arm securely around her waist, he clicked his tongue, urging his horse forward toward Sweetwater. Victoria leaned back against Dustin's solid chest, drawing strength from his steadiness as they rode. The rhythmic gait of the horse lulled baby Samuel to sleep, his tiny features peaceful despite his dramatic entrance into the world. "What brings you to these parts alone?" Dustin asked after they'd ridden in silence for some time. Victoria hesitated before answering. "A fresh start." "I was a schoolteacher back east. I thought I might find similar work in Sweetwater." She didn't mention Thomas or his betrayal. That part of her life was over, buried in the ditch where her son had been born. "Sweetwater could use a good teacher," Dustin remarked. "The last one left 2 months ago to get married in Austin." Victoria felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a place for her after all. As they rode, Dustin told her about Sweetwater, about Mrs. Henderson who ran the boarding house, about Dr. Matheson who'd patch her up, about the small school that sat empty waiting for a teacher. "And what about you?" Victoria asked, curious about the cowboy who had delivered her son. "Do you have family in Sweetwater?" Dustin was quiet for a moment. "No, madam, just me and my ranch." "It ain't much, but it's mine. Worked 10 years to save for it." There was pride in his voice that made Victoria smile despite her exhaustion. The sun was beginning to set when they finally crested the hill overlooking Sweetwater. The small town glowed golden in the dying light, a collection of wooden buildings and modest homes nestled in the Texas prairie. "Almost there," Dustin murmured, his breath warm against Victoria's ear. Victoria felt strangely reluctant for their journey to end. In Dustin's arms, with her son safely cradled against her chest, she had felt protected for the first time in months. As they rode down the main street, heads turned and whispers followed. It wasn't every day that Dustin Irwin rode into town with a woman and baby in his arms. By the time they reached Dr. Matheson's office, a small crowd had gathered. Dr. Matheson, a balding man with kind eyes, rushed out to meet them. "What in tarnation do we have here, Dustin?" Found Miss Kincaid in labor by the side of the road, Dustin explained as he carefully dismounted and helped Victoria down. Baby's already here, but she needs looking after. The doctor nodded briskly. Bring her inside. Victoria clutched Samuel to her chest as Dustin led her into the doctor's office. She felt the stares of the townspeople boring into her back. An unwed mother was scandalous enough, but one delivered by the town's most eligible bachelor was fodder for weeks of gossip. Inside, Dr. Matheson examined both mother and child while Dustin waited outside, pacing the boardwalk like an expectant father. You and your son are remarkably healthy considering the circumstances, Dr. Matheson told Victoria when he finished his examination. But you need rest and proper nourishment. Do you have somewhere to stay in town? Victoria's face fell. No, I just arrived. The doctor stroked his chin thoughtfully. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house is full up with the cattle buyers in town, but perhaps a knock at the door interrupted him. Dustin stepped inside, his hat in his hands. Excuse me, Doc, but I've been thinking. My sister's old room at the ranch is sitting empty. Miss Kincaid and the baby could stay there until she gets settled. Victoria stared at him in surprise. Mr. Irwin, I couldn't impose, it's no imposition, Dustin assured her. Like I said, the room's empty. Has been since Martha married and moved to Denver 2 years back. Besides, it's quiet out there. Good place for a new mother and baby. Dr. Matheson beamed. That's mighty generous of you, Dustin. What do you say, Miss Kincaid? A few days of country air would do you and your son good. Victoria looked from the doctor to Dustin, whose blue eyes held nothing but sincere concern. Any other option would mean separation from her child. Unwed mothers weren't welcome in respectable establishments, and the alternatives were unthinkable. Thank you, she said finally. We accept your kindness, Mr. Irwin. Dustin's face broke into a smile that transformed his rugged features. Dustin, he reminded her gently. After what we've been through today, I reckon we can use first names. That night, Victoria found herself in a small but clean bedroom in Dustin's modest ranch house. Samuel slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle Dustin had created from a drawer padded with soft blankets. Exhausted but unable to sleep, Victoria gazed out the window at the vast starlit sky. How strange life was yesterday. She had been alone, terrified, and without hope. Today, she was the mother of a beautiful son with a temporary sanctuary and perhaps the chance of a teaching position. And then there was Dustin Irwin, the cowboy with gentle hands who had delivered her son and brought them to safety. Victoria touched the simple wooden cross hanging around her neck, her mother's last gift before she died. Perhaps someone was watching over her after all. In the days that followed, Victoria regained her strength while Samuel thrived under the watchful eyes of both his mother and Dustin, who showed a surprising aptitude for baby care. My sister had 4 little ones, he explained when Victoria commented on his skill at calming Samuel. I helped out when I could. Victoria watched as Dustin walked the floor with Samuel against his shoulder, his large hand patting the tiny back with incredible gentleness. Something warm unfurled in her chest at the sight. 1 week stretched into 2, then 3. Victoria spoke with the town council about the teaching position, which they readily offered her, impressed by her education and experience. But the school term wouldn't start for another month, and Mrs. Henderson's boarding house still had no vacancies. You're welcome to stay until you find something suitable, Dustin insisted when Victoria expressed concern about imposing. Samuel's just getting used to the place. It was true. The baby seemed to flourish in the peaceful environment of the ranch, and if Victoria was honest with herself, so did she. Mornings spent drinking coffee on the porch while watching the sun rise over the prairie. Evenings listening to Dustin read from his small collection of books, these simple pleasures had become precious to her. And then, there was Dustin himself. Victoria found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved confidently as he worked around the ranch. The quiet laugh that emerged rarely but transformed his face when it did. The thoughtful way he listened when she spoke, as if her words actually mattered. On a warm evening in late August, Victoria sat on the porch while Samuel slept inside. Dustin joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Beautiful night," he remarked, handing her a cup. Victoria nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. "It is. I never imagined Texas would be so lovely." "Takes some getting used to," Dustin agreed, settling into the chair beside her. "But it grows on you." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee and watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I've been meaning to ask," Victoria said finally, gathering her courage. "Why did you help me that day? You could have ridden past." Dustin looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Never crossed my mind to do anything else, Victoria. You needed help." Most men would have been terrified finding a woman in labor. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Never claimed to be like most men." Victoria laughed softly. "No, you certainly aren't." Dustin's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "School starts next week," she said, changing the subject. "Mrs. Henderson sent word that a room will be available by then." Something flickered across Dustin's face, disappointment, perhaps. But he nodded. "That's good news. You'll be closer to the school." Victoria studied her coffee cup. "Yes, it makes sense." Neither mentioned that the boarding house didn't allow babies, that Victoria would have to find someone to care for Samuel during the day. These were problems she would solve. She had to be independent. "Victoria," Dustin began hesitantly, "I've been thinking." The cry of a coyote interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Dustin stood, instantly alert. "That's close. I should check the henhouse." Victoria watched him stride away into the darkness, her heart beating a little faster than normal. What had he been about to say? The next morning, Victoria found Dustin in the barn, repairing a broken bridle. Samuel was nestled in a sling across her chest, contentedly watching the world from his protected perch. "Good morning," she greeted, her voice sounding unnaturally bright to her own ears. Dustin looked up, a smile warming his features. "Morning. Sleep well." "Yes, thank you." Victoria shifted Samuel slightly. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Setting aside his work, Dustin gave her his full attention. "I'm listening." Victoria took a deep breath. "I spoke with Reverend Wilson yesterday when he came to visit. He's offered to help me find a woman in town who might care for Samuel while I teach." Dustin's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's thoughtful of him." "Yes, it is." Victoria hesitated, then plunged ahead. "But before I make any arrangements, I wanted to know. That is, I wondered if—" "If what, Victoria?" Dustin prompted gently when she faltered. "If there might be another solution." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Samuel and I have been happy here. I could pay rent once I start teaching and perhaps help with cooking." And Victoria, Dustin interrupted, standing and moving closer to her. "Are you asking to stay?" She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "If it's not an imposition. I know it's unconventional, but yes." The word was simple but firm. Victoria's head snapped up. "Yes." Dustin's smile was gentle. "Yes, I'd like you and Samuel to stay. Truth is, I've been trying to figure out how to ask you the same thing, but I didn't want to presume." Relief washed over Victoria, followed quickly by a more complicated emotion she wasn't ready to name. "It would be a business arrangement, of course. I insist on paying my way." Something flickered in Dustin's eyes, but he nodded. "Of course. Whatever you're comfortable with." As summer gave way to fall, Victoria settled into her new life. During the day, she taught the children of Sweetwater in the one-room schoolhouse, while Dustin surprised everyone, including himself, by becoming Samuel's caretaker. He built a special sling that allowed him to carry the baby while he worked around the ranch, and Samuel thrived under his attention. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but Victoria found she cared less and less about gossip as time passed. What mattered was that Samuel was happy and safe, and she was building a life for them both. And then there was Dustin. Living under the same roof, sharing meals and quiet evenings, Victoria found herself drawn to him in ways that went beyond gratitude. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his hands were strong yet impossibly gentle with Samuel, how he listened to her stories of teaching with genuine interest. One crisp October evening, Victoria returned from school to find Dustin and Samuel waiting on the porch. The baby, now 3 months old, broke into a gummy smile at the sight of his mother. "Look who's excited to see you," Dustin said, handing Samuel to Victoria. She pressed her face against her son's soft cheek, breathing in his sweet scent. "I missed you too, little one. Was he good today?" "Always is." Dustin's voice held unmistakable pride. "We rode out to check the south pasture. He's going to make a fine horseman someday." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "You took my 3-month-old son riding, in his sling, nice and secure," Dustin assured her quickly. "Wouldn't let anything happen to him, Victoria. You know that." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Victoria's heart skip. "I know," she said softly. "I trust you with him completely." Their eyes met and held, something unspoken passing between them. Dustin cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Dinner's ready inside. Nothing fancy, just stew." Victoria followed him into the house, where the rich aroma of beef stew filled the warm kitchen. As they ate, Victoria told Dustin about her day, how young Billy Thompson had finally mastered his multiplication tables, how the older girls were organizing a harvest dance. "Speaking of the harvest dance," Dustin said casually, "I was wondering if you might want to attend." Victoria looked up in surprise. "Together," a flush crept up Dustin's neck. "If you'd like to. It's just a town gathering, nothing formal, but there's music and dancing, and I'd love to," Victoria interrupted, saving him from his own awkwardness. The smile that broke across Dustin's face was worth any gossip the town might generate. "Good. That's good." Later that night, after Samuel was asleep, Victoria sat at the small desk in her room and wrote in her journal as she did every evening. But tonight, her thoughts were scattered, focusing on the way Dustin's eyes had lit up when she agreed to attend the dance with him. Was it possible that he felt for her what she was beginning to feel for him? The idea both thrilled and terrified her. After Thomas's betrayal, she had sworn never to trust a man again, to focus solely on her son and her independence. Yet here she was, her heart quickening at the thought of dancing in Dustin Irwin's arms. The harvest dance was held in the town hall, decorated with autumn leaves and glowing lanterns. Victoria wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the amber in her eyes, and Mrs. Wilson, the Reverend's wife, had gladly agreed to watch Samuel for the evening. As Dustin guided her through the doors, his hand warm at the small of her back, Victoria felt the stares and whispers of the townspeople. By now, everyone knew the story of how Dustin had found her in labor and delivered her baby, but their current living arrangement still raised eyebrows. "Ignore them," Dustin murmured, seemingly reading her thoughts. "They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough." Victoria smiled up at him gratefully. "You're right. Let's enjoy the evening," and they did. Dustin proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding Victoria confidently around the floor. When he pulled her close during a waltz, Victoria found herself holding her breath, acutely aware of every place their bodies connected. "You look beautiful tonight," Dustin said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Victoria felt a blush creep up her neck. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Irwin," he chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. High praise from the town schoolteacher. As the evening progressed, Victoria noticed the speculative glances thrown their way had shifted from disapproving to curious. Perhaps the town was beginning to accept their unusual arrangement. Or perhaps they were simply too obviously enjoying each other's company for anyone to continue disapproving. During a break in the dancing, Dustin fetched them glasses of punch and led Victoria to a quiet corner. "Are you having a good time?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Victoria nodded. "The best I've had in a very long time." Dustin's expression grew serious. "Victoria, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." Her heart quickened. "Yes." "It's about you and Samuel staying at the ranch," he began carefully. "I've been thinking, Dustin Irwin." A booming voice interrupted them. "Thought that was you hiding in the corner." A large man with an impressive mustache approached, clapping Dustin on the shoulder. "Haven't seen you at one of these gatherings in years." Dustin smiled, though Victoria could see a hint of frustration in his eyes. "Hello, Frank. Just enjoying the evening with Miss Kincaid here." Frank turned shrewd eyes to Victoria. "Ah, the new schoolteacher. Heard you're staying out at Dustin's place." Victoria lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, Mr. Irwin has been kind enough to rent me a room while I get established in town." Frank's eyebrows rose. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Dustin's expression hardened. "That's exactly what it is, Frank, and I'd appreciate you keeping any other thoughts to yourself." The larger man held up his hands in surrender. "No offense meant, Dustin. Just surprised to see you with a lady, that's all. Not since that business with Ellen." "Frank," Dustin cut him off sharply. "Why don't you go see if your wife would like some punch?" Looking slightly chastened, Frank nodded and moved away. Victoria looked at Dustin curiously. "Ellen?" she asked quietly. Dustin's jaw tightened. "Ancient history." "I see." Victoria didn't push, though curiosity burned within her. Who was Ellen, and what had happened between her and Dustin? The moment broken, they rejoined the dancing, but a subtle tension had entered Dustin's shoulders that hadn't been there before. Victoria couldn't help wondering what he had been about to say before Frank interrupted them. And who Ellen was, that the mere mention of her name could transform Dustin's open expression into a closed door. As they rode home later that night, the harvest moon illuminating the path, Victoria found herself stealing glances at Dustin's profile, wondering about the parts of him she still didn't know. "I had a wonderful time tonight," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Dustin looked over at her, his features softening in the moonlight. "So did I. It's been a long time since I attended one of those dances." "Because of Ellen?" The question slipped out before Victoria could stop it. Dustin was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "Ellen Bradshaw was the daughter of a rancher whose property bordered mine. We were engaged to be married about 5 years back." Victoria's heart constricted. "What happened?" "She found someone with better prospects," Dustin said simply. "A cattle baron from Austin with more money and finer things than I could offer. Can't really blame her. I was just starting out then, barely making ends meet." "I can blame her," Victoria said with unexpected fierceness. "She chose wrong." Dustin glanced at her, surprise and something warmer flickering in his eyes. "That's kind of you to say." "It's the truth," Victoria insisted. "Money and fine things don't make a good husband. Honor, kindness, hard work, those things matter more." They had reached the ranch, and Dustin dismounted before helping Victoria down from her horse. As her feet touched the ground, his hands lingered at her waist. "And what about you, Victoria?" he asked quietly. "What happened with Samuel's father?" Victoria stiffened, then sighed. He deserved the truth after sharing his own pain. His name was Thomas Blackwell. He was passing through Philadelphia, where I taught school. He was charming, handsome, full of stories about the West and promises of adventure. Dustin's expression remained carefully neutral as she continued. "When I discovered I was expecting, he promised we would marry and head west together to start a new life. Instead, he took my savings and disappeared, leaving me with a note saying he wasn't ready for family life." "Coward," Dustin said, the single word filled with contempt. Victoria nodded. "Yes, he was, but in a strange way I'm grateful. If he hadn't abandoned me, I wouldn't have come west on my own. I wouldn't have Samuel, and I wouldn't have—" "Wouldn't have what?" Dustin prompted when she trailed off. Victoria met his gaze steadily. "I wouldn't have met you." Something shifted in Dustin's eyes, a heat that made Victoria's breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but when Victoria's arms slid around his neck, Dustin pulled her closer, deepening the kiss with a quiet intensity that made her knees weak. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Dustin rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. Victoria smiled, her heart racing. "What took you so long?" His answering smile was rueful. "Wasn't sure you felt the same, didn't want to complicate things if you didn't." "And now," she whispered. "Now I'm hoping you'll let me court you properly, Victoria Kincaid," Dustin said, his voice earnest. "I know it's complicated with Samuel and our living arrangement, but I care for you both more than I thought possible." Victoria's heart swelled. "I'd like that very much, Dustin Irwin." With Samuel sleeping peacefully at the Reverend's house for the night, they stayed up late, talking by the firelight, sharing stories of their lives before they met, and tentatively planning a future that might include them both. As fall deepened into winter, Dustin's courtship of Victoria became the talk of Sweetwater. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, carved a beautiful rattle for Samuel from cedar wood, and on Sundays, they attended church together, presenting a picture of family unity that gradually won over even the most skeptical townspeople. For Victoria, these months were a revelation. She had never known a man like Dustin, steadfast, honorable, and endlessly patient. He respected her independence, supported her teaching career, and loved Samuel as if the boy were his own flesh and blood. By Christmas, it was clear to everyone in Sweetwater that Dustin Irwin was hopelessly in love with Victoria Kincaid and her infant son. What wasn't clear, at least to Dustin, was whether Victoria was ready to make their arrangement permanent. On Christmas Eve, with Samuel asleep in his now proper crib, a gift from Dustin, they sat before the fire exchanging presents. Victoria had knitted Dustin a scarf from soft blue wool that matched his eyes, while he presented her with a leather-bound journal, knowing she wrote in her old one each night. "There's one more gift," Dustin said after they had admired each other's presents. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Victoria's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple gold band with a small pearl at its center. "This was my mother's," Dustin explained, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "My father gave it to her when they homesteaded here 40 years ago. It's not fancy, but it's beautiful," Victoria breathed, her eyes filling with tears. Dustin took her hand in his. "Victoria, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Finding you that day, delivering Samuel, I believe with all my heart that God put you in that ditch at that exact moment, so our paths would cross." Victoria laughed softly through her tears at his blunt phrasing. I know I'm not the most educated man, and this ranch isn't the grandest place, but I love you, Victoria. I love Samuel too, as if he were my own son. I want to be a father to him and a husband to you, if you'll have me. Victoria looked into the eyes of this good, honorable man who had saved her in more ways than one, and felt her heart overflow with love. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Dustin, I will marry you. His face broke into a smile of such joy that Victoria felt momentarily breathless. Dustin slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of the future they would build together. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in the small church in Sweetwater. Victoria wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar that she had sewn herself, while Samuel, nearly 5 months old now, wore a tiny suit that Mrs. Wilson had helped fashion from one of Dustin's old vests. The entire town turned out for the wedding, even those who had initially disapproved of their arrangement. It seemed that the love between Dustin and Victoria was so evident, so genuine, that it had silenced even the most persistent gossips. After the ceremony, they celebrated at the ranch with a feast prepared by the townswomen who had, over time, come to respect the new schoolteacher and her unconventional path to happiness. That night, after the guests had departed and Samuel was asleep in his crib, Dustin carried Victoria across the threshold of their bedroom, no longer her room but theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said, setting her gently on her feet. Victoria looked up at her husband, still marveling at how drastically her life had changed in 6 short months. From abandoned and in labor in a ditch to married to the most wonderful man she had ever known, it was almost too much to comprehend. "I love you, Dustin," she said simply, reaching up to touch his face, his eyes darkened with emotion as he covered her hand with his own. "And I love you, Victoria, always will." Their life together unfolded with the seasons. Victoria continued teaching, becoming beloved by her students and their parents alike. Dustin's ranch prospered under his careful management, and he built a reputation as one of the most fair-minded and successful small ranchers in the county. And Samuel grew, thriving under the love of both his mother and the man who, in every way that mattered, was his father. On Samuel's first birthday, they held a small celebration at the ranch. As Victoria watched Dustin teaching the boy to clap his hands together, her heart so full it felt it might burst, she placed a hand over her still flat stomach. She hadn't told Dustin yet about the new life growing inside her, their child, created from the love they shared. She would tell him tonight, after Samuel was asleep, and watch his face light up with the joy that had become a constant in their home. Life wasn't perfect, of course. There were difficult times, droughts that threatened the ranch, illnesses that swept through the town, the normal challenges that any family faced. But through it all, Victoria and Dustin faced each obstacle together, their love deepening with each passing year. On a warm summer day 5 years later, Victoria sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Dustin teach Samuel, and their daughter Rose to ride their ponies in the corral. At 6 years old, Samuel was already showing the same natural affinity for horses that Dustin possessed, while 4-year-old Rose, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, insisted she could do anything her big brother could. 2-year-old James played at Victoria's feet, stacking wooden blocks that Dustin had carved for him, while the newest addition to the family, 2-month-old Margaret, slept peacefully in her cradle. As Victoria observed her family, this beautiful life that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances, she thought about the desperate young woman she had been, alone and in labor in a ditch beside a dusty road. How could she have known then that her darkest moment would lead to such light? Dustin looked up from the corral, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 6 years of marriage, the smile he gave her still made her heart skip a beat. He said something to the children, then walked toward the porch, his stride confident and easy. "What are you thinking about so seriously, Mrs. Irwin?" he asked as he climbed the steps and sat beside her, reaching down to ruffle James's dark hair. Victoria leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sunshine that always clung to him. "I was thinking about the day we met, about how finding me in that ditch changed both our lives." Dustin's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "Best day of my life," he said simply. "Finding you, delivering Samuel made me believe in miracles. Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked softly. Taking on another man's child, dealing with all the gossip at the beginning, Dustin turned to face her, his expression serious. "Victoria, there's nothing to regret. Samuel is my son in every way that matters. The day I delivered him, something happened inside me like God was telling me this was my family, even though I didn't know it yet." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as Dustin continued. "Besides," he added with a tender smile, "if I hadn't found you in that ditch, I'd still be a lonely bachelor eating my own terrible cooking and missing out on all this." He gestured to their children, their home, the life they had built together. "I love you, Dustin Irwin," Victoria said, reaching up to touch his weathered cheek. "More today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." Dustin leaned down and kissed her softly. "And I love you, Victoria Irwin, for all my days." As the sun began to set over their ranch, casting golden light across the land that was their legacy, Victoria thought about the unexpected paths that life could take. From the darkest moments could come the greatest joys, from the deepest despair, the most profound hope. And sometimes, when you least expected it, you could find yourself in a ditch beside a lonely road, giving birth with the help of a kind-hearted cowboy who would become the love of your life and the father of your children. Sometimes, Victoria reflected as she looked at her beautiful family, the most difficult journeys led to the most perfect destinations. In the years that followed, the story of how Dustin Irwin had found Victoria laboring in a ditch and delivered her baby became something of a legend in Sweetwater. People would tell it to newcomers, embellishing details with each retelling, until Dustin joked that, according to town lore, he delivered Samuel during a tornado while fighting off a mountain lion. But Victoria and Dustin knew the truth, that their beginning had been both simpler and more profound than any tall tale could capture. It had been about two lonely souls finding each other at the exact moment they both needed someone most. By the time Samuel turned 18, the Irwin Ranch had grown to be one of the most prosperous in the county. Dustin had proven himself not just a skilled rancher but a shrewd businessman, investing in the expanding railroad and the growth of Sweetwater itself. Victoria had eventually given up teaching to focus on raising their 5 children: Samuel, Rose, James, Margaret, and the youngest, Daniel, who had his mother's thoughtful nature and his father's gift with animals. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Dustin surprised Victoria by taking her back to the spot where they had first met, the ditch beside the now well-traveled road where Samuel had been born. "Doesn't look like much, does it?" Dustin remarked as they stood looking down at the shallow depression, now partially filled in by years of wind and rain. Victoria squeezed his hand. "It's the most important place in the world to me." Dustin pulled her into his arms, his hair now streaked with silver but his eyes still as blue and clear as the day they'd met. "To me too, Victoria, to me too." And as they stood there, remembering the desperate young woman and the determined cowboy who had delivered her baby and carried them to safety. Victoria knew with absolute certainty that some loves were simply meant to be, even if they began in the most unlikely of places. After all, their love story had begun in a ditch beside a dusty road, with a baby's first cry and a cowboy's steady hands. And in the end, wasn't that the most beautiful beginning of all?